Profitability team listeners. We are back here today. I've got Miss Dana with me, and we are here to talk to you about numbers today. I'm excited for this one. Practice owners, doctors, dentists, all of you guys out there, this is a really important one, and Dana and I have some awesome information to really hand out to you. But before we dive in, Dana, how are you doing over there? How are your clients? We're wrapping up the end of the year. I know I've seen a ton of successes in so many of our clients. How are your clients doing? What are you working on right now with your clients?
Yeah, it's great. 2024, I think, was an interesting year for a lot of practices. I think different than some of the more recent years, but I think in all of that, practices are still coming out with huge wins, lots of growth, and getting patients to accept treatment. So I call that a win for 2024 for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was a lot of, gosh, unknown uncertainties in 2024. I think 2020 we had some uncertainties too, right? We walked into the year with uncertainties, but then it kind of grew from there. And we've had just this massive growth in dentistry, I think, since 2020 and COVID shutdowns. And this year it was kind of like, great, hang on, dentistry's still doing fine, and we're in a recession proof industry, but what the heck is going on? And so there were just so many questions, I think, in outside of dentistry and financially, that it did lead to some oddities that we haven't seen in recent years, like you said, within the dental world. I know a lot of my practices have been, I think they're coming out of it now, but we had some issues with confirmations or patients coming to appointments or pre-collecting, kind of making sure that those pieces were really dialed in and locked in, because I did feel as though here in the recent months, kind of September, October, some August really was tough for some practices in case acceptance, but then November hit, got a couple weeks into November, how we'll say it, and things just started to really turn around again. And I think, again, there's so many uncertainties of the world translated into uncertainties within the dental industry. And Dana, I think you saw that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, guys, we're on the other side of that, though. This is the exciting part, and this is one of my favorite times of year. Really looking forward to what's to come, and we have to look at what was, right, to know what can be, in many cases. But this is the time of year where we really get to dream up what next year will look like and what it can look like, and it's just so much fun for me. I love building out goals with practices. I love seeing what it's going to take to get you to that goal and really working backwards. So dream big and then work backwards and make it smaller and smaller and smaller. So today I wanted to chat about that, and Dana I pulled in to help me just really discuss how we go about increasing goals every year. And we do this with all of our clients. We look at, what does an increase look like for next year? What is it going to create for you? So a lot of our clients will say, I want to have more time at home with my family. We're having a baby this year. We want to take a maternity leave. I want to take a vacation to Europe for 2 weeks. I had a doctor that took her family to Paris this year. Like, how are we building that into the goals? And realistically, how are we making your business work for you so that you can have the personal life that you want? And so your team members can as well. But really, what does the business have to do to afford you those pieces of life that are really, really valuable and important to you? One of those things that we look at is your profitability. And your profitability is key, you guys. That is the extra money on top. That's the cush. This is really what my business is able to create for me, within that. So we do look at that when we build out your goals, but just on average, we wanted you to know what an annual increase looks like per practice. Majority of the time, a practice that's already been working off of their BAMs, so their bare ACE minimum, right? This is what it takes to pay my bills. This is what it takes to survive, plus a percentage to get that profitability. So we typically look at, I know Dana and I talked about this morning. We're usually looking at, what's your BAM? So what's your baseline? This is my baseline, just like at home. Like, this is what it takes to feed my family and to pay my bills. This is the baseline money that's going out. And then 20% on top of that. So baseline plus 20% creates a profitable business. If we're only looking at baseline, you guys, and I don't know, I felt, Dana, like in that conversation this morning, that it was a confusing space maybe for people. That's one of those spots I think where we talk dental. People are like, "What are you talking about?" Right? Our marketer this morning was like, "What's a bloody prophy?" And I was like, "Oh, that's funny." So it's one of those spaces that's like, "What are you even talking about?" But Dana, I know you do this with your clients too, of really that baseline plus that 20%. So Dana, how do you go through that with your clients and really helping them to figure out, one, what their baseline is, and then what that 20% is on top?
Yeah. So really it starts with their overhead. So what is their overall practice expenses? Okay, so that's going to be part of their bare ace minimum. And then what are they taking home, right? Also to any debt services, because we've got to pay our debt services to be able to utilize them, whether it's a practice loan or equipment loan or whatever it is as far as debt services. We've got to put that in your BAM, because at the end of the day, those things have to be paid or business will be shut down for failure to pay those things too. So just making sure that you know all of those pieces that go into it and all of that is accounted for, because oftentimes doctors are like, well, no, I don't put my pay in there. Well, yeah, right.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah,
not being able to live your life and you're not being able to afford, like, you have to be paid too. That's why you are a practice owner. That's why you chose ownership, right? So we want to make
yeah,
sure that that is included in there. So let's just say we know, their BAM is 100,000, because I like round numbers. So
yeah, same.
100,000, we would obviously say then, okay, for that 20% profitability, we need an extra 20,000 each month. So your goal then for that month becomes 120,000. And as long as we hit
Mm-hmm.
120,000 each and every month, that will give you your BAM every month plus your 20%.
Yep, I love that. I think the confusion, or to separate statements, is we've talked about, and we talk about all the time, your overhead. And Dana, you just mentioned your overhead, right? So we do say your true overhead is, if someone were to purchase your practice from you today, what would they be responsible for taking on? Your pay, your loans, come with you, right? They're not going to continue paying you. So, what would a practice owner take from you if they were to purchase your practice is your true overhead. So, in order to find your BAM, you find your true overhead. This is your outgoing money. And then you add in your loans, your debts, and your pay. And if your associate pay or whatever else is not included in your true overhead for you, you add that in underneath. This is what you have to make in order to maintain your business as it is. So if you were looking at your personal finances, you would say, great, what are my credit card payments? What's my mortgage payment? What's my car payment? Those go into your baseline for what you need to make as an individual within your home. So you're going to think the same thing. What does my practice need to make to baseline, to say we are at a 0 0, right? We are 0 0. We are not negative, but we are not positive. This is what my business has to make. And then we add, like Dana said, that 20% on top of it. So that's the difference, you guys, when we talk overhead versus BAM, is overhead is different. Your BAM is going to be everything included. So I think that's where some of that confusion may come in. Now, that 20% can be bucketed out however you want it to be. So that 20% could be bonuses. I do have a practice that's like, Tiff, this is our BAM, but I want my practice to bonus every month. I'm like, great. Then let's add a percentage after your BAM. A certain percentage of that will be their bonus. So they know if they get to this tier, this tier, or this tier. But for that practice specifically, you guys, and for most of my practices that talk about this, I want you to know I don't go BAM plus 10% and then they get that bonus at that 10%. No, I still want BAM plus some. Now it's above and beyond that. So it has to be above and beyond your profit. Otherwise, now you're bonusing and taking out of your profit for the practice. And the profit for the practice should be going towards renovations. It should be going towards new equipment. It should be going towards whatever you want it to be, an emergency fund, like all these things to be reinvested back into the practice, we're not taking money out to pay people. That's an above and beyond situation. So just clarifying that a little bit for you guys. Going into a new year, once you have that settled, you're like, this year, Tiff, I went off my BAM plus my profit. That was my goal. Fantastic. So then next year, going into 2025 goals, we really want those goals to be, I like 10%. I usually say 7 to 10% on top of what you did last year. Super easy math, number one. Number two, Inflation has to be accounted for. Inflation on average in America right now is like near 7%, right? At least. So if we go above and beyond that 7% and hit that 10%, again, we're looking for that profit margin. Because if we're only accounting for 7% inflation, again, we're just status quo. We're not growing. In order to see that growth, we've got to go above and beyond. So that 10% creates that above and beyond. And again, that's if you've been operating off of BAM plus profitability. If you haven't, then let's work the numbers and figure out where you should be and what you're able to do next year. But that 10% should be able to be finagled within that. And creating that space is really fun. Figuring out how am I going to get 10%. A lot of doctors' teams usually will be like, that sounds awesome, but like, this schedule is full. Where in the heck do you want me to get? So we're adding 10% every day. So we're adding 10% of time every day, Tiff. Like, how are you doing this? I'm like, no, it doesn't have to be that hard. This is where we make sure you're pulling your financial analytics. Like, where are you at for your fees, your fee analysis? Have you had a rep pull your fee analysis? Have you requested fee increases from all of the insurances? Have you looked at insurances that you could drop? How do we squeeze more out of the time that you have? Dana, I know a lot of clients come in and they're like, I want to reduce days, but I want to be more profitable. Fine, absolutely. You guys, we can create the magic for whatever you want. If it's unrealistic and we're like, that's a little crazy, we will tell you that too. But oftentimes coming in from you're working 5 days or 4 days and you're like, I really want a half day admin day. Great. We're going to squeeze more dollars out of the time that you have. So Dana, well, I know you've been working on this a lot with a lot of your clients this year specifically, and block scheduling, things like that definitely contribute. But what are some pieces that you've got a lot of clients currently working on for next year to squeeze more out of that time that they have?
Yeah. So one, it is taking a look at just each provider in the practice, their production per hour. Because if we're looking to
Yeah.
cut hours, then we know exactly how much production we need to make up in different hours of the day. Also, too, it helps us see just is there any provider that like, okay, they've got a little bit more opportunity. So we can kind of, let's say we look at hygiene, right? And they're not hygiene across the board isn't hitting their daily goal or their hourly goal. Then what can we do there? Can we talk about upgrading, our perio protocol? Can we talk about adding adjunct services? What can we talk about on that end? On the other side, when it comes to providers, can we look at just efficiency, right? Are we maximizing and utilizing our assistants so that there is more actual doctor time to do additional dentistry? Another thing that I'm working on as far as building that in and helping to see goals is just cost of procedure, right? Versus time it takes to do the procedure. So cost per procedure is, I'm doing that with a couple of offices just because it does help us see, okay, if this doctor does this procedure in 70 minutes and this doctor's doing it in 90, like what does that look like as far as then their production per hour and where can we squeeze and those things. So I think it starts by knowing really what you're producing each hour, especially if we want to cut back hours. And then as we're looking at that, who has potential for growth or where do we have potential for growth? And then how do we get there? What does that look like?
Yeah, I like the breaking it down by cost per procedure and hourly. That's something I think that we forget we can do and that really makes such a drastic difference. The perio space, the hygiene space is huge, you guys. I have a client this year that we were just looking at their KPIs this morning, Dana and I, and they had a goal of increasing 1 to 2% on their perio uh, program, right? So hygiene was going to go from 18 to 19% on average is where they were in 2023. This year, they needed to hit at least 20% overall production, which means the hygiene department as a whole contributes 20% of the monthly and yearly production. So we looked at it this morning, and luckily that office manager had filled out November. And so for November, they're actually tracking at 25% for their hygiene department, which is great. I usually push for goal wise, so you guys know for goal's sake, 25 to 30% for hygiene to be making up of that goal. So when you're going into next year's goal and you're like, gosh, 10% means I'm going to be at $2.1 million next year. freaking fantastic. Do it. So look at, okay, well, what did my hygiene team do on average? What was their percentage now with us not looking at it? And think, okay, what would 1 to 2%, what would a 2% increase from last year look like financially? It's over a year, it's usually pretty significant what a 2% increase can do. And then how can we get a 2% increase? Normally, when practices are not tracking their hygiene department, they're typically sitting anywhere from like 14, 15 to maybe 20% on average. I would say probably like that 17% range is pretty common for practices that haven't been really looking at it and caring. So then you have a space of like, fantastic. What's a 1% increase in everything that we do? It could be making sure we're always charging out for the PAs. That's a 1% increase. Like, really looking at all of the coding and making sure we're getting every single code in there every single time, because those things add up over time. But when you're parsing it out, sometimes I think doctors feel like, gosh, $2.1 million, oh, that's a lot of implants, that's a lot of crowns. Like, you are not the only one that's providing that. And so, really looking at what are the other contributing factors? How can we add more value? How can we add more whitening this year? So, in office whitening that our assistants are doing, what would it look like if we did 3 more Invisalign cases this year in comparison to last year? What would it look like? How many of each thing do I want to do? Oftentimes I'll take a practice and say, what do you want to do more of next year that you love doing this year? And I know I had a doctor that was like, gosh, Tiff, I love placing implants. I want to do more implants. Great. So we went into 2023 with a goal of X amount of implants this year. And so then the goal from there, we backtracked and we're like, okay, great. Every month you have to do this amount of implants every month to get to this yearly goal, which would allot for X amount of dollars towards your yearly goal. So then we translated that into, well, how many opportunities do I need based on my case acceptance? So then we said, well, you've got to talk to X amount of people about missing teeth in the implant option to get your 65% case acceptance on it, to get to that. And within the first quarter of the year, he had surpassed his quarterly goal and was well into his 6-month goal for the year. But it was because we had worked backwards and made it so simple. It was really easy for everyone to track. From there, the team was like, well, how do we keep track of all of these? Like, we're talking, they're like, I have ideas. And now the team is creating tracking systems and using the whiteboard, and they're following up with the patients because they can see it and it's so easy. So that 10% increase from last year can feel a little daunting sometimes. And I've had practices, Dana, that I'm like, to get you on track to where you actually want to be, and because we weren't working off of a BAM plus 20% previously, you actually need a 15% increase this year to get you to where you should be. And still, though, as long as you can increase it by how much ever you want to, and as long as there's a plan in place and we can work backwards to see how we can actually accomplish it, I think that's where the success really lies. And I've watched it time and time again of how easy it can be to just say, how many implants do we have to do? How many Invisalign cases do we have to start? How many, all on fours do I need to do? And you guys, holy Hannah, if you don't like surgery, you don't want to do all on fours, don't do it. It is not a space where it's easy money. It is not lucrative if you do not like doing it, so don't do it. Pick the things that you enjoy doing. Is Botox something you want to do next year? Fillers, like, what does this look like? Cosmetic cases, like, what do you love doing? And how do we translate that into part of that percentage goal for next year? Dana, what other thoughts do you have on that goal and just really making sure that it's set in stone?
I love that you do that. And I think too, if you're like, well, I don't really know even, okay, I know 2.1, right? But what does that look like every day? Or what does that look like every month?
Mhm.
Map out your projections, put in your number of working days, put in your number of hygiene days for each month, your number of doctor days each month, and then play around with your numbers. Say, okay, well, I did, let's say $3,000 a day this year, and I'm trying to grow 10%. Okay, well, that looks like 3,300. So put in 3,300 and see, does that get me to my 2.1 million? If it doesn't, okay, let's increase that. Let's say 3,500, put that in and see, okay, does that get me there? Okay, that gets me partway. Now, what can I do with hygiene, right? If hygiene hit, let's say 960 this year, if I get them to 1,000, if I can just get $40 additional every hygiene day, what does that look like? So take your working days, take where you were for the last year, look and say, okay, average, this is what we produce each day. What does it take each day? Because once you know what it takes each day, each week, each month, then you can do exactly what you did, Tiff, and say, okay,
Yes.
how do we do that? Because oftentimes, if we don't know what that looks like, if we don't know that that's the difference in a crown every other day, right? Once you have it broken down into daily and weekly and monthly numbers, then it's very easy to say, okay, look, these simple things, if done consistently, or this addition of 10 crowns each month, that's what's going to get us there. But you have to know kind of what those smaller numbers look like. It's real easy to say 2.1, but when you break it down into daily and monthly, it's super simple then to see where opportunity lies.
Totally agree. And I love that you said like going from 3,000 to 3,300 or 3,500, because even if at 3,500 and I've got an 8 hour day, it's like that's less than $100 an hour in addition to what I was already doing. That's a couple PAs, that's a
Yes.
couple x-rays. Like it's charging out for the things that you're doing. So I love that. Thank you, Dana. Right now, you guys, right now is the time of the year to see where are you going to end. You should be able to project at this point in the game, like what it's going to look like at the end of the year. Start mapping out what next year can look like. Don't wait till January, because in January you should be boots on the ground, freaking running for those goals. So start building that out now. Reach out to us, you guys. Hello at thedentalateam.com. If you have any questions on this, there was a lot of numbers involved. There's a lot of trajectory, a lot of projections. Reach out to us. We have all of this information. We love giving it out. And we love nothing more than to answer your questions. So hello at thedentalateam.com. You can find us on all the socials as well. Dental A Team. We want to hear from you. Drop us a 5-star review. Let us know that you loved this content, and we cannot wait to support you in your biggest 2025 dreams. Let's make them all a reality. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Dana, and we'll catch you guys next time.